started, and then we'll have individual sessions or sections for you all to ask questions. So we got Mr. Abel, our transportation director. He can help answer any bus questions you have. We have a general information. So if you have a specific question about a specific address or want to know anything that pertains to a particular situation, then we have Ms. Akers and Mr. Spalding that can help you with that. We've got Mr. Holt, our district athletic director, that can help with any athletics questions. And then we've got Ms. Farmer and Ms. Brady, our middle school principals, Marion County Middle School and Lebanon Middle School, if you have any school-specific questions. So we'll have them available after I finish for any specific questions that you may have. So the first question that you may have is, what caused the need to redistrict? And I just want to talk briefly about that. So in 2019, the Marion County Board of Education approved a resolution to redistrict. And the reason for that was KDE required us to do this in order to build a new Calvary Elementary School. So I know there were questions about the enrollment there and how we could go about doing a new Calvary Elementary. So in all processes that we've used, community input has been very important to this board. So the community spoke and they wanted a new Calvary Elementary School, and that's why the Board of Education pursued that. So in turn, due to the enrollment, KDE typically will not let you build an elementary school unless it's 300 students or more. So that's when the board, at the requirement of KDE, voted to do a resolution that essentially said that we would redistrict. So KDE required us to redistrict, was the initial process. And then secondly, I want to talk briefly about middle schools, and I know the board will echo this as well, but when I first became superintendent 2 years ago, it was very clear to me and very clear to the board that our community wanted to go back to the two traditional middle school model of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So there were lots of reasons why, as the public, that you all wanted to do that. For instance, we had students that were out on the eastern end of our county, Rush Branch, for example, and traveling all the way to Marion Middle. So we listened to that feedback, the board listened to that feedback, and then acted on that to go back to the two traditional middle school models. So that's sort of two major reasons why we're at the position where redistricting was necessary. So a couple of factors to consider. So again, KDE does monitor, and they set things that we have to follow, and one of those is the 85% rule. And what that means is that the KDE will not let you construct a building or have a building without trying to get that enrollment at 85%. So before construction can be approved, you have to, again, like we mentioned earlier, that resolution that I mentioned about Calvary Elementary, we have to come up with a plan to fill that school at least 85%. So that's a rule that we have to follow. So in general terms, we have to try to work as a district to ensure that our boundaries are such that we don't dip significantly below that 85% rule. So, and it's also very important, and this is a good time to mention that, is we're working really hard to build a new Lebanon Elementary School. The board and I have worked with our state legislators and been to KDE, been to the SFCC, which stands for School Facilities Construction Commission. We've been to Frankfort many times to try to take every avenue possible to get the funds necessary to construct a new LES. So in turn, our plan is to build an Lebanon Elementary School that has approximately 350 student capacity. So what we want to ensure is that our enrollment doesn't drop at any particular school such that it jeopardizes our ability to get a new Lebanon Elementary School. So again, that's why I briefly mentioned this 85% rule, and those are two major reasons why it's very important to the district as we work through the redistricting process. So another factor that we consider is equal opportunity. So it's much easier and it's necessary that we try to work as a district to ensure that students at Calvary Elementary have the same opportunities as students at West Marion Elementary and Glasscock Elementary and Lebanon Elementary. Same thing for middle schools. We want to try to ensure that students in Marion Middle and Lebanon Middle have the very same opportunities, because that's ultimately how we'll get better as a district. So in this entire process, we've tried to look at our enrollments, and it's sometimes tough just due to locations of buildings and such, but it's sometimes tough to ensure that they're absolutely equal. But our general goal is to try to create elementary schools that are similar in size and middle schools that are similar in size. And again, the reason that's entirely important is because we want to provide the same opportunities for students at each one of those schools. And in part, that's due to the way that staffing is allocated, money, the way the money comes into the schools. We want to, again, ensure that not one school's enrollment is not so significantly different that we can't offer the same opportunities at one school as we do another. So again, if I got into that a minute ago, but funding. So some of our funding that we receive through federal funding especially is due to the economic status of our families. So we wanted to make sure that we consider that in this redistricting process as well. So, you know, for example, you wouldn't want one particular school to have a higher socioeconomic status than another school, because what would then in turn happen is the money from the federal government would flow into that school, and then as a result, they may get more services or more opportunities than another school. So we worked really closely to try to ensure that, again, the enrollments were very similar in nature. And you may ask, well, what does this federal funding do? Well, it does lots of things for us. You know, some of our staff are hired through this federal funding. You know, you've probably commonly heard the most frequently used is Title I. You hear a Title I school, and all that means is that we receive federal funding based on socioeconomic status for that school. So again, some of the things that we purchase for that, some of our Chromebooks are purchased through that. Some of our additional staff are hired through our Title I programs. Chromebooks, some of our Chromebooks are purchased. Some of our instructional materials and support services that we offer students. There's a lot of things that we purchase through Title I funding, but the ones that I just mentioned are some of the most frequently used purchases. All right, so who created the district boundary lines? So we did partner with a company that does this. This is what they do. It's called TransFinder. They're a company that's focused on logistical issues such as school boundary lines. So this is what they do for a living. So we wanted to absolutely ensure that we get this right. So the board did choose to partner with the TransFinder program, and what that does is it actually does a process called geocoding. And what that does is it downloads our student information system, and it populates every student's address in the entire district, and we call them blueberries, but it geocodes that on the map. So it actually does look like a little blue dot that does that. So that information is loaded into the TransFinder program. It identifies the students as far as, like socioeconomic status, and it looks at all kinds of different data to essentially build what it considers the ideal district boundary line. So that is what that program does. That is what they do. And so we worked with the TransFinder program. We did work to fine tune a couple of things. Some things, such as bus routes, for example, we have to fine tune that because the program doesn't necessarily understand the logistics of maybe turning down one road to get to another road. Because what we didn't want to happen was, if you live on this side of the street and you're on this side of the street, we didn't want you to go to two different schools. So we did make a couple of tweaks there, but for the most part, we utilized the TransFinder program to work and help with those logistical issues, and again, to try to take any bias or any perceived bias out of it. So we partnered with this company for that very reason. So obstacles that we face, and there were a few, just to be honest with you. So data cleanup was a major obstacle that we faced. So inaccurate or sometimes multiple addresses in our student database. So Infinite Campus is the program that we use. I know you all use that for online registration. It's probably or student grades. It's probably commonly how that you're familiar with that. But sometimes, with parents entering information into the database, sometimes there are multiple addresses, or sometimes it may spell out ROAD for road and it doesn't recognize that. So we had how many where's Miss Eggers? I'm gonna put her on the spot. How many addresses did you have to manually enter?
It was probably several hundred.
Yeah, so I was thinking like 600 addresses that we had to manually enter. And that's just, again, because the program doesn't recognize it, and it views that as such because it doesn't recognize it as an address. Or again, sometimes it's inaccurate information that we had to take a lot of time to clean that up. I will say Infinite Campus, who's the state database system that we use, and all districts in Kentucky use it, but just to be honest with you, they weren't the most pleasant to work with. So we actually had to pay up front for them to even talk with us, and we had to schedule a time, and then they called us back. It took many weeks to work through those issues with Infinite Campus, but we ultimately did and got that data cleaned up so that we could move forward. We did also find some areas where boundary lines caused an issue. So again, like I briefly mentioned earlier, what we didn't want is, again, an address to be one side of the street go to one school and then the other side of the street go to a different school. So we really tried to think of every single potential issue as we worked through this process. And then again, also we worked to make sure that our transportation routes made sense. So I know one of the frequently heard complaints that I got was, again, students being on the bus too long and different things like that. So we really tried to look at this and tried to make sure that we improved on our efficiencies for bus transportation. And we wanted to, again, ensure that students weren't on the bus longer than what they currently are. And so that was, again, we tried to think of every potential issue as we worked through the TransFinder program to ensure that we came up with the very best, again, I won't say best, but the best that we could come up with given the locations of our schools and such to ensure that, again, that's just the best that it could be. So middle school boundaries. Now the middle school boundaries have been approved. And again, you can see the map here, and we do have larger maps if you have questions afterwards, and we can zoom in. Those maps are available online if you want to zoom in and see a particular address. But again, what our ultimate goal was for this is we did not want a student to have to drive by one middle school to go to another middle school. I mean, you all saw the news earlier in the year, and I won't name the county, but we wanted to ensure that was not a problem here. So we wanted absolutely to ensure that our students were not needing to ride by a particular school to get to another school. That was absolutely critical. And then also we wanted to make sure that our boundary lines make sense geographically. And as you can see here on our middle school boundaries, there's of course, the population is it's dense here, and we tried to make it such that to try to keep those populations similar, but we had to kind of wrap around the city of Lebanon to ensure that happens, but we couldn't go much further in order to avoid students driving by one school to get to another school. So again, due to the locations of the schools, it's not 100% equal, but it's pretty close, and that was our ultimate goal, is again to try to create equitable schools and as similar in enrollment as possible. So that's ultimately, again, using the TransFinder program, trying to be as efficient as we could with boundary lines and district transportation routes. This was ultimately the very best that both the system and the tweaks that we could make. That's the best that we could come up with, and it's pretty close. All right, so again, like I mentioned earlier, boundary lines for the middle schools were approved at the March Board of Education meeting. Schools do have similar enrollments, like I mentioned earlier. Again, that's going to fluctuate. It actually fluctuates on a daily basis. I think the latest information I'm thinking off the top of my head is like 302 versus 325 or so was the last information that I heard. So again, very similar in enrollments, not exact, but similar. And again, most of our families, we've had a online question that families could submit and ask questions about our boundary lines. We've had that up for months, so most of our families are aware of which school they're going to as far as middle schools go. But we are going to mail each family a welcome letter to make sure that they absolutely understand which middle school that their child will be going to. So those will go out soon. But again, I think most families are aware of which middle school they're going to. But you will also receive a welcome letter, because we want to make sure that, again, that our families and our students do feel welcome at the school that they're going to. And then again, for middle school boundary lines, this will take effect in August. So for the 24-25 school year, elementary boundary lines, which we'll get into in a bit, are another year out. Okay, so middle school athletics, I received a couple of questions about this. So based on our anticipated level of interest, and I say anticipated because, this is subject to change based on our level of interest from our students, but based on the level of interest that we've received to date, each school will have its boys basketball and volleyball teams. Each school will have their own, and then schools will combine the other teams. And again, this is just based on interest level. If we have an increase in interest level at one particular school or another, this can be re-looked at. But based on the information that we have available today, this is ultimately what will be. It will be a boys basketball team at each middle school and a volleyball team at each school. So, and then not to be confused with the high school, because they're now looking to implement a boys volleyball team. So that's not yet going to be at the middle school, but we're working on seeing what kind of interest follows. There's not very many schools in Kentucky have a boys volleyball team, so we're looking at who we potentially might play against and looking at what interest we have at the high school, and that could be something in the future that we look at. All right, so middle school transportation. So again, middle school bus transfers. So we had a lot of transfers this past couple of years with our Marion Middle and Marion County Night Academy. But again, we will see a significant decrease in our bus transfers for the upcoming school year, just because, again, we'll be going back to the two traditional middle school model. Again, probably the most impactful is students from the eastern part of the county will no longer have to attend Marion Middle. So it should make those bus routes for our middle school students much shorter than what that they've been the last couple of years. And then, but if you have specific questions about particular address or bus, we do have Mr. Abel back there at the table for information if you have questions about that. And then as always, the schools can answer that question, and then we'll have available information online like we do every year. All right, so elementary school boundaries, where are you with that? So we do have draft boundary lines. The board has not approved those yet, but because we're just further along, obviously, with middle schools than we were elementary schools, we do have draft boundary lines for elementary schools developed. Again, I mentioned some of the delays with Infinite Campus and earlier, but we do have a draft for that. Based on the draft that we have available for the board to consider in the coming months, we are at or very close to 85% at each one of our elementary schools based on the proposed draft boundary lines for elementary. So that's a good thing. And then, but now I will say the caveat to that is we did create the draft boundary lines under the assumption that we would build a new Lebanon Elementary School with a student capacity of 350 students. So I believe our current district facilities plan has the capacity of the current Lebanon Elementary School at some unreal number. I believe it's 541. Yeah. So that's not realistic. I mean, obviously. What's that?
The new elementary, is that Calvary?
Well, the one I'm talking about here is Calvary Elementary. The new one's 400 capacity. But the Lebanon Elementary School, our goal is to build a new 350 student capacity school there. So again, we did kind of think forward in that we would build an elementary school on the Lebanon Elementary site for 350 students, and that is the process that TransFinder worked through to try to keep those enrollments at that 85% rule. Again, considering a student population at Lebanon Elementary School or a potential student enrollment of 350 students. So that's just some of the things that we consider with elementary school boundaries. So continuing on, again, we do have a draft. We've got larger model back there that you can see in questions if you have specific ones that you can ask. Our detailed map will be released. The draft map will be released after this presentation tonight. Again, it's going to be available for our families to look at. It wasn't initially released because we wanted to avoid confusion. So what we didn't want to happen was, our middle school boundary lines that we released were for the upcoming school years. We're still at least a year out on our elementary school boundary lines. So what we didn't want to do was release them at the same time and have mass confusion, because again, one is for this upcoming school year, one is for the next school year. So and we are we're still working through some adjustments, minor adjustments with the elementary boundary lines. So again, we did that to avoid any potential confusion. But our maps are available online. They are very detailed, so you can actually zoom in, see a particular street, and again, all of that is available online. But again, I want to make sure that you understand that elementary boundary lines are in draft format. The board has not approved those, and they will take effect for the 25-26 school year, so 1 year from now, whereas our middle school boundary lines will be for next school year. All right, so what's the status of Calvary Elementary School? If you've kept up with our board meetings, you know we are on target. We do anticipate that the building being opened with students in it in January of 2025, so very, very soon. If you've ridden by that school lately, you see there's been significant progress. Share a little story. We took the Calvary Elementary teachers on the closing day. We took them and did a tour. And I mean, I can't describe how excited and happy they were. If y'all, I mean, feel free to jump in anytime.
They claim classrooms.
Yes. So it really, truly is an awesome building. I heard one of them say, "I'm going to get lost in this building." It is nearly 3 times the size of our current Calvary Elementary. So when you all, we will have an open house, but when you all see this building, you're going to be amazed. It truly is something to be proud of. And I mean. I went to Calvary Elementary myself, and to walk into the new school, it brings a great sense of pride to me. It really does. Our entire county needs to be proud of the facility improvements in general that this board has made. I mean, I tell them all the time when of course, born and raised in Marion County, and when I drive by each one of our facilities and look at the improvements that this board has made over the last couple of years, I mean, it is something to be proud of, you know, from the windows, and I know I'm getting off topic a little bit, but from the windows at Marion Middle to the new HVAC equipment that filters the air for our students, to the brick replacement at Glasscock, to I mean, you can clearly see this nice building that we're in now, to some of the minor renovations that we've done at our other facilities. It is truly something to be proud of. So I'll leave that alone, but I am extremely excited about where we're going with our facilities. So again, I've talked about this a little bit, but I do want to get into a little bit of detail of where we are at with Lebanon Elementary School. So we did, again, go to our legislators, and we did request for Lebanon Elementary School to be included as a line item budget for state assistance. Our taxpayers and our community have done their part in the nickel tax, and we asked for a little bit of help. And here's the reason why we asked that. So when we first planned several years ago to renovate Lebanon Elementary School and build a new Calvary Elementary School, at that time, Calvary Elementary was anticipated to cost in the neighborhood of $12 million, just a little bit less. The total bid came in at $24.2 million. So our bonding potential was quickly depleted just due to construction costs. I mean, I'm building a house myself, and I can tell you it's real. So, yeah. But so that's what happened. KDE also has another rule called the 80% rule, and you can't renovate a building and if it's going to exceed 80% of the cost to build a new one. So when we truly looked back at the scope of work at Lebanon Elementary School, we saw that it was going to exceed the 80% rule that KDE sets, and that's why we moved from a renovation to a new construction. So where we are at with Lebanon Elementary School, although we were not included as a line item budget, what we were included, and this is something different than we've ever seen, this has never happened before, but what the legislators did do is they set aside, I believe, approximately $140 million in bonding potential. And what bonding potential is, not to get too far in the weeds, but it's like when you go to buy a house and you get a mortgage. The state kind of provided that bonding potential on our behalf. But before they totally gave that to us, they're doing a review of the project. Again, kind of looking at that 85% rule that I talked about, making sure that we've done the redistricting. You know, they're going to look at this project in its entirety, and then they're going to look at our district finances, and then there's going to be some type of review process. We don't entirely know all the details of that, but there will be some type of process that takes place to review, again, the project, make sure that we're close as far as student enrollment, make sure that it's a project that we can do. And then ultimately someone, we don't know who that someone is, will give a green light to this potential bonding. And so I do feel hopeful about it. I think, you know, we've obviously done our part and we'll continue to do our part. And I am hopeful that we will see this. All right. So in order to build a new LES, I just want to keep going back to this 85% rule. It is absolutely critical that we keep our student enrollments, especially at the elementary, as we work to get a new LES at that 85%. It is absolutely critical, because what we don't want to do is move students out of a particular school and jeopardize the potential of this project. So, you know, as far as questions about where the new LES would be, we are planning for it to be on the site where it currently is. And again, it would be, the proposed enrollment would be approximately 350 students. All right, so the question that I probably get asked the most is, can you request that a child attend a different school? And the answer to that is yes. So we do have a change in school assignment form application that you can complete. Several of our families have done that. Those, for the most part, have not yet been approved. We are still working through that process. There are many steps that we have to take to ensure that those can be approved. Again, you know, like some of the things that I mentioned, the 85% rule. You know, we do look at our staff first, you know, because what you wouldn't want is to require a student of a staff member to go to a different school from where they work at. So that clearly would not be ideal. Again, we do have to look at changing schools and whether the district can provide transportation. So typically speaking, if a student does do a change in application for a change in area form, then, you know, we do not guarantee district transportation, but now we may provide it if it's available. So again, it's just based on an individual basis. And again, those requests must be approved based on, you know, some of the criteria that I mentioned a minute ago. All right, so questions. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but we do, if you want the link to submit a question online, you know, we do have a QR code here that you can scan. Several of our families have submitted questions via this. It's been up for several months. I promise you will get an answer back, and it's a pretty quick response. Again, we just want to make sure that our families feel communicated with, feel like your questions are being answered, and provide all the information that we can. This is, I think, after hearing the presentation tonight, there's a lot of moving parts with this. There's a lot that went into this, a lot of planning, a lot of decisions to be made, but we've worked through this process, and again, I think it's going to be something good for our students and our families ultimately. All right, so if you all have any questions, you know, I'll be available around. You know, we do have our general information table, athletics, transportation, and then Miss Brady at Lebanon Middle School. It's kind of hard to say. And then Miss Farmer at Marion County Middle School are both here if you have any particular questions. So, all right. Thank you all for coming.